Hey baby, are you here with anyone?
No, I just came with some friends.
I am digging your look, girl. Let me buy you a drink.
Aw, that is so sweet. Thank you.
Bartender,
What can I get you?
get this girl a martini.
You got it. Coming right up.
So what are you doing after this?
I was actually just gonna go home and watch House of the Dragon. It's a pretty good show.
Well, how about you come home with me?
Sir, your card was declined.
Well, I can't buy you a drink, but I can take you home to my parents' house.
You still live with your parents?
Yeah, you see, I'm kind of a budget drone, but I'm a 7-inch.
I've never flown a 7-inch before.
Well, I've got a pack charged with your name on it.
Do you have any friends that are 10 inches?
Yeah, I know a couple. Why?
You think I could get their numbers? Hey everybody, I'm Bacon Ninja, and on my wall over there is a drone. And that drone cost as much as this HDZero Mobula 7 does. But this is a micro. And a couple of those up top are micros, but most of them are full-size drones. Now, which one on the wall do you think cost as much as this Mobula 7 HDZero 75mm Tiny Whoop? I'll give you a minute to think about it. If your guess was this 7-inch drone, then you were correct. But how is that possible? The Mobula 7 over there is less than 200 bucks. So is this 7-inch quad. And that's as a plug and play. It comes in a box, basically like this. This is the Darwin 129. It is a 7-inch drone. It is analog, you can tell by the gigantic floppy antenna on the back. And this thing retails for $189. But how is Darwin doing that? I mean, how can you put a 7-inch drone completely assembled, other than the receiver, in a box, and sell it for $189? What is wrong with this drone? There has to be something wrong with it, right? It can't possibly be any good for that kind of money. It's a 7-inch, it's supposed to be expensive. We're used to spending $300 or $400 on a 7-inch drone, not $189. And that price of $189 is actually just a little bit more expensive than when it actually first released. It was even cheaper than that at one point. It's just recently gone up to the $189 price point. How are they doing that? Can you fly a 7-inch drone for that kind of cheap budget? Well, today we're gonna take a look and see if it's possible and if this thing's actually any good. Maybe you want to get into 7-inch drones, and this is your first stab at it. I mean, realistically, worst case, you blow up this $189 7-inch drone and you walk away from it like it is a steaming garbage fire, and just cut your losses. The Darwin 129 is essentially a clone of the Eachine Tyro 129, which is yet another cheap 7-inch drone, but this is Darwin's stab at it. And I said Darwin. The DarwinFPV 7-inch 129 is a wicked pisser. And for Darwin's take on this kind of drone, they chose to go with a 2507 motor at 1800 kV. And the voltage range on these motors is between 2 and 5S. Yes, I said 5S. That is weird, right? We'll get there later, but yeah, the motors on this thing, 5S rated. The ESC they have crammed in it is a 50 amp BO S ESC, pretty basic stuff here, and it is rated from 2 to 6S. For the flight controller on this build, they're going with a basic F4 board running an MPU 6000 gyro, but it does have a barometer, a black box SD card, and the spec sheet says Bluetooth. The VTX is also pretty basic in that it's just an 800 milliwatt analog VTX. It does perform pretty well, it does have smart audio, but it's just basic stuff. The camera on this thing, which we will cover extensively, is just a run-of-the-mill generic FPV cam. I actually can't find any manufacturer markings on it, which is slightly concerning. But to make up for that nameless camera, it does have a GPS shoved in the back, and an LED board from the factory with a fully functional buzzer. Kind of nice addition there. And last but not least, for props, this thing comes in the box with a set of GemFan 7040s. And that's it. That's all you need to know about the Darwin 129. Review done. No, the review's not done. We have actually quite a bit more to talk about because I took this thing flying. And the spec sheet shows us how they save some of the money. The nameless camera, which, again, we're going to cover extensively because, well, you'll see why pretty soon. But the flight controller specs and the ESC specs and the VTX specs all kind of speak for themselves as to how they saved money in this build and why the whole thing is 189 bucks. Now again, it doesn't come with a receiver at all, so you're going to have to put a receiver in. And before the end of the video, I will show you some tips about how to do that because it's not abundantly clear when you get it out of the box. And even when you get the board in front of your face, it's still not that clear. So I'll show you how to do that here in a little bit. But yeah, let me show you how the thing flies. Let's do that. Okay, so in that footage, hopefully you look down the bottom left of that DVR. Did you notice anything weird about that DVR footage? If not, let me just play about 10 seconds of it for you again, in case you didn't catch it down there the first time. No, you have not been dropping acid. That is the way the analog cam looks in this build. It's horrible. And I know why it's horrible. It has nothing to do with the sensor or the fact that it's completely a nameless brand camera. It's 100% the lens that they chose to put on it. The lens has almost no fisheye at all. And the camera has a pretty decent FOV. The lens provides the FOV. But since it has no fisheye, everything is flat. Which means that as you're flying in your goggles, things get ridiculously distorted around the edges. Like you'll go to move around a tree and the tree just kind of warps up the side, but it doesn't warp in the normal fisheye way that we're used to as FPV pilots. It does this weird like stretching thing, almost like it's being strangely cropped, but it's completely about the lens. The lens is just too flat on this camera. If you buy one of these, you have to put a different camera in it. It's just a wreck waiting to happen. I had a hard time getting used to flying this. And I'm flying it at about 55 degrees here. That's how it's set. That's how I have the HD camera set. And in the footage, I was flying at these angles. So about 55 degrees. I'm going pretty fast. Now I could never get a GPS lock. The GPS is not great. I never actually got it to lock. I did get a different GPS to lock at one point, so I know the quad will do at least 99.9 miles an hour. You're welcome, FAA. But I was not holding back. The thing is running really fast. It's a 7-inch. It can do that. But man, the camera kills it. It kills the whole experience. It makes it almost not fun to fly. In fact, I took this with me to fly with a buddy and offered to let him fly this after he had watched me fly it in his goggles, and he refused because he said that he would just immediately obliterate it because he wasn't and couldn't get rapidly used to the way the camera looks. So if you buy one of these, just go ahead and tack on another 30 bucks because you will be putting an analog camera in this. You will not be happy with this camera. And the quad as a whole is not really worth going digital for. You can't really shove a Vista in here. You might be able to put the walk snail system in it. Disarm. You have reached that point in the video where you need to go to this timestamp. If you do not have any idea what this timestamp thing means, just trust me and go to the timestamp. If you do have an idea what it means and you intend to hang out with me for it, shame on you, as well as my patrons. And yes, as always, this portion of the video is intended to shame my wonderful patrons because these insane people give me money every month for some reason which I will never understand. All I've ever asked for is a like or maybe a subscription to continue to please the algorithmic gods at YouTube because they control everything about our modern way of life. Instead, these people open their wallets and a little bit of their hearts to give me a little bit of money every month. And for that, they need to be shamed. And in order to shame them, I will Photoshop their names on a scene including a diverse range of bacon and say them in a really weird way. Chow FPV, Dylan H, Free Range Chicken FPV, Logan R, Sweet Willie, TS13 FPV. And now that they have been shamed, I can thank them. I thank them tremendously. There's no way that I could have this channel, grow this channel, and continue to produce this content without support like theirs. I really appreciate them. I really appreciate you, each and every one of you, and hope that you've enjoyed this shameful section of the video. Now back to the content. But you're not gonna cram a tall Vista in it, maybe an HDZero Freestyle VTX, but if you think about it, the cost of going digital on this quad is almost as expensive as the quad. So I don't think it's worth putting a bunch of digital parts in. If you want to get into 7-inch cheaply and not worry about blowing the thing up if it hits the ground, not spending a ton of money, then keep it analog because that's really where the price point works for this quad. If you want to go digital, this is not the quad for you. And it's not because of space. You can get a single height 30 by 30 in here. So something like Walk Snail or HDZero will fit, it will mount up the camera, and there's a place to put the VTX antenna. It's all perfectly doable. However, I do not recommend that you do it on this quad. A couple of other things to note. As soon as I got it out of the box, I gave it ye oldie bendy test, and it was creaking and a cracking. It definitely had some wiggle and wobble, and that is a little bit due to the design on this. If you noticed in the product overview parts that I did in the video, it uses nuts on top of the arm screws. We stopped doing that a long time ago, and we stopped doing that for a reason. Using a press nut is much more secure. They are nylock nuts, they're not bad quality nuts, but they are there nonetheless. And that means the arms give a little bit more than you'd like, and being so long, they give a lot more than you'd like. I tightened them up pretty good. It's not wiggling and wobbling anymore, but you could see in the flight footage that the thing shakes pretty good. And that's not just because of that. The tune is not ideal. And this is running Betaflight 4.3. 2. What Betaflight are we on anymore? It's running 4.1, which is a little bit old now, but that's not undoable. And it does have a BLE SCSC, but again, it's super cheap. It is running Bluejay, but we probably want to do some tuning and RPM filtering and flash it. And in another video, I'm actually going to do that. I will flash Betaflight 4.3 on it. I will put Bluejay on it, an updated version. I will enable RPM filtering, and I will change out the props and try to get a good tune. But that's going to come later. I was flying it as is for this review. It's a decent quad for the money. You can't ask for too much in the price point, right? I mean, you can, but this is FPV, so you won't get it. And just one more thing to touch on before I show you some tips about how to put the receiver in. This is a very light quad. It comes in right around 640 grams. And the props are making about 2,000 grams of thrust apiece. So that means the thrust to weight ratio on this is intense. It's gonna go fast. It also means that you can't really fly at a low angle. You're gonna wanna kick the camera up. I'm gonna recommend to at least 45 degrees if you wanna do anything that looks like a straight line at a reasonable amount of throttle that still gives you enough control. If you don't, you're gonna spend a lot of time at the low end of the throttle just trying to tune in your height because it's gonna be so touchy down there. But if you kick the camera angle up and you give yourself a little more forward momentum, you put less thrust vector toward the ground, which means that as you give it a little more throttle, you're gonna go forward instead of upward, and you're gonna be able to do altitude control a little bit better. So this thing is really made to run at 40 plus degrees. Like I said, I'm running it at 55 currently. And to do that, you will have to take the camera out, both screws, move the plug on the back of the camera underneath the flight controller, and then put the screws back. Because if you don't, it's just gonna hit the flight controller and you're not gonna get any more angle out of it. They maybe should have thought of that, but I think they're really going for someone buying their first drone. Don't let this be your first drone. Don't let that happen, because this might just ruin the whole experience for you. It's gonna go super fast. The camera is gonna look like hot garbage, and you might get discouraged. But if this is not your first drone and you've been flying 5-inch and you wanna try 7-inch out, this is a perfectly acceptable way to do it. Again, you will need to put a camera in it because you will immediately hate this camera. If you like this camera, you're demented and belong in some kind of asylum. But any other normal person will want to put a different camera in it to get a decent experience out of it. And when you do, if it's not your first drone, you'll probably really enjoy it. That's my take on it. It's worth $189. There are some quirks, obviously. It's got some older technology, the motors are kind of cheap, and you know, it does its thing. But I think once we get a tune on it and switch out the props, I'm gonna try some bi-blades and some other tri-blade props and see what I can do for the best performance, which I will let you know in a separate video, that it's actually a decent little rig and it's not gonna matter too much if you just nail it into a wall or dump it out in a lake. As long as you get your GoPro back, that's all that's gonna matter, right? That's all we care about is the cameras. Screw the drones. Yeah, screw you, drone. But before we wrap up the review on this, I do want to show you a couple things about how to put the receiver in. Because like I said before, this thing does not come with a receiver. The first thing you will be doing with this before you fly it is putting a receiver in. And if you're using something like FrSky, which if you're using something like FrSky, do not purchase this drone. You will be very disappointed when it fail-safes at a quarter of its potential range. It actually has a nice plug header for that. But if you're using something like Crossfire or Express LRS, like you should be with a drone capable of this much speed and range, you're probably gonna wanna heed these pointers, because I had to learn the hard way and dig around quite a bit to do it. So let me waste my time and save yours. Let's take a look at that real quick. So the real issue is that on this flight controller, there are very few open pads. There are 4 pads toward the front of the flight controller for 2 different UARTs, UART 3 and UART 4. Toward the rear of the flight controller, there are plugs. Toward the front, there are plugs, but they're all in use, except for one. And in the box with this, you get a nice little bag with wires for one of the plugs, and that is for your receiver. So this plug back here is where you will want to plug in your S-Bus receiver. And the pinout for that plug is the wire all the way to the far end of the plug is S-Bus, and then we have 5-volt and ground as we move toward ourselves. And that's all fine and dandy if you're just gonna run an S-Bus setup, but if you're doing what you should be and you're using something with a serial connection, you're gonna need a UART2. And that doesn't exist. And the problem with using the UARTs on this is that you can't get any power off of anything else. I took my multimeter and I poked it everywhere on all the empty pads that are completely unmarked, could not find 5 volts or ground in any useful way. The only way to get 5 volt and ground is to use the plug at the back. So what you'll want to do is use 2 pins out of that plug, the 5 volt and the ground, and then you're going to need to tie to the TX and RX of a UART toward the front. Now about those UARTs. UART3 is actually in use for something already. I believe it is smart audio. So you'll need to use UART4. That will be your receiver UART, and you will need to go into Betaflight to select that as your serial RX, because by default, it's using wherever the S-Bus is as serial RX. So that's the tip. Save yourself the time. I did all the poking around with a multimeter, so you don't have to. One other tip is that I flew with this on 6S, even though the motors are not rated for 6S. They're rated for 5S. Which is weird, but whatever. And all I have is 6S packs, and they're 1300 mAh packs, and they're decent. So I wanted to use them. I actually went into Betaflight 4.1, which doesn't have a little tab for it in the PID tune section like 4.3 does, but I put a motor output limit on this. And if you put an 80% motor output limit, it will emulate 5S to your motors. So you can run this drone on 6S. The flight controller and the ESC are rated for it. But you will need a motor output limit of 80% in order to accomplish it. So I'm gonna drop the Betaflight command line for that in the video description if you want it for some reason. You're buying one of these and all you own is 6S packs. And on those packs, 1300 mAh at this angle got me, well, you saw it in the footage, like 2-ish minutes of flight time. It's not very much. You're gonna need some big packs. But at the end of the day, this is a solid buy for less than 200 bucks if you want to get into the 7-inch game. There's some stuff to complain about, but then again, I could spend $500 and probably still find something to complain about. So why not complain about a cheap drone? Because at least for the cheap drone, I have the right to complain. Instead of something super expensive that, you know, if I lose it, I will cry, literally cry, and maybe hold a funeral for it. With this, at least I have the right to complain about it, and I didn't spend a fortune, and if I obliterate it, then who cares? We buy another one, and we obliterate that one too. But then I'll still have to buy another camera, because I hate this camera so much. There's so much hatred in my soul for this camera. It's horrible. But anyway, thank you for hanging in there. This has been the Darwin 129. It's a heck of a little thing for the money. I don't know how Darwin does it. I'm a big fan of a lot of their products. I have their flight controller, their all-in-one flight controller in my pork chop, and that thing is a rugged little beast. The hardware on this seems okay, but it's $189, so we'll see how long it lasts. But check out the tuning video and the prop selection portion of the tuning video, and if you buy one of these, maybe I'll have some tips for you within a couple weeks when I get that done. And if you do want to buy one of these, just go anywhere you want because I have no affiliate links. Just buy it wherever. I don't remember where this came from. It just showed up in a box one day like an abandoned drone baby on my porch. But I love it. As you do. Anyway, thanks for hanging out with me. Stay greasy, and until next time, me and my drone will catch you later.